This scene wasn't edited. Look at her Love Boat blooper. The Manhunter. From 1974 to 1975, this police show ran on CBS for 7 months and 22 episodes. The lead in The Manhunter, played by the famous Ken Howard, is an ex-Marine called Dave Barrett, whose best friend dies during a bank robbery. The show takes place during the Great Depression in the 1930s, and the main character, Dave Barrett, quits his peaceful farm life to become a private detective who wants to catch as many crooks as possible. He goes all over the country and only comes back to see family. There were guest stars like Sam Elliott, Mark Hamill, Claudia Jennings, and more, and the show had a great cast and story. However, it was canceled after only 1 season. The Feather and Father Gang. In the crime movie The Feather and Father Gang, a woman lawyer figures out a way to get her con artist father to help her solve crimes. Since the show's scheduling changed almost every week, it was hard to figure out when to watch it. It ran from December 1976 to July 1977. It was said that the show tried too hard to be like Switch and failed miserably. The show didn't do well with the changes to the schedule, and it was pulled after 14 episodes, with the last one airing in July 1977. The Fantastic Journey. The story of The Fantastic Journey was about a family that goes on a trip to the Caribbean. When they get to the dangerous Bermuda Triangle, they run into a green cloud that wrecks their ship and traps them on an island they can't get away from. The island is in a time zone that's not its own. The story of the show was already pretty strange, and the fact that the makers had different ideas about where it should go didn't help. The Fantastic Journey was dropped in the middle of the season after only 10 episodes had aired. The Bob Crane Show. The TV show The Bob Crane Show was about Bob, a man in his 40s who quits his dull job as an insurance salesman to go back to medical school. His wife, played by Patricia Hardy, has to take care of the family while she's at school, which isn't normal at the time. The network was very upset with the show because it didn't do well with viewers and only ran for 13 weeks. The show failed because the stars didn't have enough chemistry with each other, so NBC chose to stop it. Sunny Comedy Review. Sunny Comedy Review had a hard time getting people's attention, even though it had a big name. It first aired on September 22, 1974, which was also the year that Sonny and Cher split up. It's weird, but that didn't stop them from having their show that year. The show was on ABC, but no one wanted to watch it because it was mostly about Sonny and not much about Cher. Some reviewers said the show wasn't funny and was almost painful to watch. Everyone was sad that Cher wasn't there. The show's numbers were always low, so it was canceled after 13 episodes. The last episode aired in December of that year. Big John, Little John. In Big John, Little John, a teacher who's 40 years old drinks from a strange spring of youth and changes into a 12-year-old boy. Change is temporary, but it happens at bad times. The show only lasted 1 season, even though it had a great story. It debuted on NBC in September 1976 and only had 13 episodes. In December, the show was over and most people had forgotten about it. If you still want to watch it, you might be able to find its 2009 DVD. The Associates. The Associates was an American sitcom that was based on a book by John J. Osborne Jr. The show had Wilfred Hyde-White, Joe Regalbuto, and Shelley Smith as its stars. It was made by the same people who made Taxi. It was up for 2 Golden Globes in the end, but that didn't help it past the 19th episode. It ran from September 1979 to April 1980. It's not very long. Only 9 of the 13 shows that were shot were shown on TV. The 4 that weren't shown will never be seen again, which may be a good thing. The Eddie CPA Mysteries. During the 1970s, American TV had a lot of unique mystery shows, such as the Eddie CPA Mysteries, which starred Vincent Baguetta as an oddball lawyer called Eddie. He tried to figure out very complicated murder cases. From September to January 1979, the show ran on NBC. To keep people interested, the producers gave them a challenge. figure out who the killer was before Eddie CPA did. But it's not hard to figure out why the show was dropped after only 13 episodes. It just wasn't good enough. Kids from Caper. From September to November 1976, the Kids from Caper aired. Popular shows at the time like Scooby-Doo Where Are You?, Shazam, and The $6 Million Man were made fun of in the show. It also had original songs and 2 records. Even though a lot of work went into the show, the versions weren't funny enough to get people to watch. The show had 13 episodes and was never picked up for a second season. The Great American Dream Machine. In 1971, The Great American Dream Machine made its debut. There were both humorous and political acts on the skit show. An episode aired every week and presented by Marshall Efron. Chevy Chase, Andy Rooney, and Albert Brooks were some of the actors who played lead roles in The Great American Dream Machine. The show would get a second season, but each episode was only 60 minutes long. Even though the show tried to be the American version of Monty Python, not many people remember it today. Guess the 34 episodes weren't good enough. Cos. The show Cos, which was named after the popular host Bill Cosby, debuted in September 1976. Each show lasted an hour and a half and had plays performed by a large group of actors. The show didn't do well, even though Cosby was the host and his name was in the title. The ABC comedy only had 9 shows in its first season. The show was already over by the end of November 1976 because it didn't get enough viewers. People weren't watching, even though the concept sounded interesting. The Chisholms. The Chisholms was a Western that took place in 1844. It showed how a family moved from Virginia to Wyoming. Along the way, the family had to deal with Nez Perce and family fights. It had Robert Preston as the head of the family, Rosemary Harris as his wife, and Ben Murphy as the youngest child. Sadly, neither the interesting story nor the great acting could save the show. The Chisholms was on CBS from 1979 to 1980 and had 13 episodes before it was taken off the air. The Swiss Family Robinson. The first episode of The Swiss Family Robinson aired April 15, 1975. It was an action show that ran for 1 season from 1975 to 1976. The show was based on the same-named book, and Martin Milner played a man who got stuck on an island with his wife and 2 young children. Some shows had to air as many as 4 times because of schedule issues, which didn't keep people interested. There were only 26 episodes of the show, and the last one aired April 4, 1976. There was never going to be a second season of The Swiss Family Robinson. Amy Prentice. Jessica Walter played the lead role in Amy Prentice. Amy's a police officer who's quickly made chief of detectives when the previous chief dies. The show is about her. Amy also had a teenage daughter, which was played by Helen Hunt when she was young. The show was a spin-off of Ironside. Even though it had a unique idea, it was dropped after only 3 episodes, which aired from December 1974 to February 1975. Perhaps the fact that each episode was 2 hours long made it hard for people to follow along with the show. Djk and Company. It looked like the best idea to have the well-known Dick Van Dyke star in his show. There were funny acts, singing, and even dancing on his show. It looked like this show could never fail. Some pretty big shows were up against the show, and not even Dick Van Dyke could beat them. It was a surprise that the show only had 12 episodes, since it had such a big star attached. The show got an Emmy, even though it only ran from September to December 1976, but viewers didn't like it and it was ended. Love Boat. When it premiered on ABC in 1977, Love Boat was a romantic comedy drama show that loved the charm and attractiveness of life on a cruise ship. As the ship sailed to faraway places, the show followed the beautiful and funny adventures of the guests and crew. The charming Gavin MacLeod played Captain Merrill Steubing, and well-known actors like Lauren Tews, Bernie Kopel, and Fred Gandy were also in the group. With the open sea as a background, each show told a series of love stories that were all connected. Even though the show was popular and the guest stars were very attractive, Love Boat ended after 9 seasons of success. It was the end of an age on TV that praised the fun side of love and travel. Snoop Sisters. There were only 4 90-minute episodes of the Snoop Sisters. Mildred Natwick and Helen Hayes played aunts who were retired and tried to solve crimes. The 4 parts of the show were spread out over 2 years, which made it hard for people to keep up with or care about it. It was decided that this NBC mystery show would not be renewed, in part because it caused a stir when it featured famous rock star Alice Cooper. You can guess that people didn't like the show he was in. It was called The Devil Made Me Do It. The Sixth Sense. In 1972, ABC showed a show called The Sixth Sense, which told strange stories about ghosts and EVPs. The show did run for longer than most on this list. It had 2 seasons with 13 episodes in the first season and 12 episodes in the second. The show didn't work, though, even though it had a scary concept. Stars like Joan Crawford, Stephanie Powers, and Steve Forrest came on as guests, but it wasn't enough to save the show. It ran for 2 months and then stopped in December 1972. Rollout. Rollout was a CBS show about life during World War II. It was based on a true story. It showed drivers from the 50/50th Trucking Company, a group whose job it was to bring goods to troops. The drivers liked going to bars close to their base when they had free time. Plan for the show was to be like the popular MASH, but it didn't work. Rollout debuted on October 3, 1973, but didn't last until January 4, 1974. The show ended after only 12 episodes had aired. Project UFO. Project UFO from 1978 sounds like a show that would be interesting, but it just couldn't hold people's attention. The first episode of the show aired on February 19th, and its goal was to look into the secrets of UFO sightings across the country. Turned out that most of the sightings were fake, which may be one reason why the show never really took off. Even though the show ran for 2 seasons, most people forgot about it after it ended in 1979. It's not fun to think about solving puzzles and coming up with logical reasons for them. Paris. James Earl Jones played a police captain named Woody Paris on the CBS show Paris, which aired in 1979. Woody taught criminology and tried to answer very hard problems. The show also showed Paris's home life, but that wasn't enough to keep people interested. This was partly because the show aired on Saturdays at 10 p.m., which is one of the worst times for CBS shows. To try to save the show, it was changed to Tuesdays, but that didn't help the numbers. In January 1980, the show was dropped with 2 episodes still to run. 3 Girls 3. The 1977 TV show 3 Girls 3 was sad because it only had 4 episodes. The show's concept was to cast 3 unknown women as, well, 3 unknown women and show what happened to people when they became famous quickly. Debbie Allen, Ellen Foley, and Mimi Kennedy were the names of these people who no one knew. The writers and directors had a hard time selling the show, and many networks wanted to cast well-known stars, which went against the show's idea. The network and viewers didn't like the show once it started airing, so it was pulled after only 4 episodes. Mulligans Stew. The show Mulligans Stew, which ran from 1977 to 1981, was a comedy drama about a family who take in 4 kids who've lost their parents. As you might expect, some changes had to be made, and the show showed how the family's daily lives changed as they got closer. NBC canceled Mulligans Stew in December 1977 after only 1 season and 6 episodes. The show had good acting and a good story, but it wasn't enough to save it. Mr. T and Tina. The stars of the 1976 TV show Mr. T and Tina, NBC wanted to make a show based on one of the characters from Welcome Back, Kotter, but things didn't go as planned, and the show had to be canceled after only 9 episodes. The story was about a Japanese genius named Taro Takahashi who lived with an American nanny named Tina Kelly. It was one of the least popular shows of the 70s. Sadly, the show's comedy was often called insulting and stereotypical, which is what caused it to be canceled in the end. Me and the Chimp. Me and the Chimp was a comedy series that aired on CBS in 1972. It was created by Thomas Miller and played by Gary Marshall. The show's premise was pretty unique. A dentist's daughter brings home a chimpanzee one day. However, it didn't become a hit like its producers' other shows like Laverne and Shirley and Happy Days. There were only 13 episodes, and the dentist's relationship with Buttons the chimpanzee didn't last long. Three's a Crowd. ABC tried to cash in on the success of Three's Company with Three's a Crowd. In 1979, on the game show Three's a Crowd, a man had to choose between his wife and his secretary as the person who knew him best. To be honest, we're surprised that ABC ever thought this idea could work. The show didn't do well at all and made people's marriages worse. It was shut down by the network after only a few shows. Chopper 1. Emergency was a hit show on NBC in the 1970s. It wasn't long before producers tried to write a show that would be just as famous. Chopper 1 was born in January 1974. After several failed efforts, the show was about a California police helicopter team, and it was mostly about two pilots named Don Burdick, played by Jim McMullen, and Gil Foley, played by Dirk Benedict. The show failed, and after 13 episodes, it was taken off the air in April 1974, even though it cost about $140,000 to film each episode. Carter Country. Carter Country, an ABC show that ran from 1977 to 1979, had an amazing 2 years and 44 episodes. But it's still not a success story because people still had problems with the show that was sensitive to different cultures. Carter Country, starring Victor French, Keene Holiday, Vernie Watson, Richard Paul, Harvey Vernon, and Barbara Kaysen, was about how different police officers from different countries and backgrounds got along with each other. The show was canceled because it didn't get enough viewers, even though it sounded great on paper. David Cassidy, Man Undercover. David Cassidy, who played the lead in The Partridge Family, was so popular in the 1970s that he had his show called David Cassidy, Man Undercover. In it, he was a police officer who was sent to look into a high school drug ring. Simon Oakland and Ed Harris were two other well-known players in the show. The show aired in 1978 but was pulled after only 10 episodes because many fans and reviewers saw it as a cheap attempt to get Cassidy's career going. Sword of Justice. Sword of Justice was about a man who lived like a playboy during the day and became a cruel assassin at night. This is different from Batman and other superheroes like him. Jack Cole sent his enemies 3 cards to let them know he was coming for them. People didn't like the show, and they thought it was a bit much that the assassin warned his victims. Producers only put out 9 episodes, and NBC chose to end the show for good. The American Girls. The American Girls was a CBS show that aired for 6 days in 1978. It was another one of many TV shows that tried to copy Charlie's Angels. A lot of people tried to make a hit TV show like Charlie's Angels did in the 1970s, but none of them were good enough. A news show called The American Report had 2 beautiful investigative reporters. Priscilla Barnes and Deborah Klinger play the lead. This show was an entertaining adventure drama, but these girls never had a chance because it aired at the same time as ABC's The Love Boat.